All right, this is part three. Sorry, part two. Part two. I kind of screwed up the other day, and I deleted a whole bunch of stuff after realizing that I didn't have the microphone on. So I skipped a little bit of the Agenda 2030 from basically 14 to 26 of their mandate, so to speak. So you can go look it up, but it's more to give you an idea of what they're talking about and how they want to implement stuff. So let's just jump into this. So hopefully I won't make that same goof again. Make sure that the mic is on. There we go. And yeah, so it goes like this. 26. To promote physical and mental health and well-being and extended life expectancy for all, we must achieve universal healthcare coverage and access to quality health care. No one must be left behind. We commit to accelerating the progress made to the date in reduction in newborn children and maternally by the end of such preventable deaths by 2030. We are committed to ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, in other words, abortions, including for the family planning, abortions, information, education. We will equally accelerate the pace of progress made in fighting malaria and tuberculosis and hepatitis, Ebola, and other communicable diseases and epidemics, including the addressing growing antimicrobial resistance and the problem unattended diseases and infection of developing countries. We are committed to preventing the treatment of non-communicable diseases, including behavioral, developmental, and neurological disorders, which constitutes a major challenge for sustainable development. Well, first off, how are they going to give world health care systems? Well, one thing they're doing right now, this is one of the other thing about the migrant crisis and stuff like that, and mass refugees going all over the world, and mass immigration, is that it makes it a world healthcare system. So it doesn't matter who pays into it; everybody gets a kick at the can. Problem is it dilutes and strains the healthcare systems around the world so much that very few, less people and less get help. So yes, you get free treatment, but you might die waiting for treatment, and you're seeing this more and more even in first world countries. So again, how do they very utopianistically, how do they pay for this plan? They can't. It's impossible. So the only thing they can do is force others to give up what they have for others. So basically, the United Nations decides who's needy and who's not. That's kind of a scary thing when you think about it. Again, this is how it ends up genocidal. Is whether it's by purpose or not, what you end up with is a healthcare system that is just not sustainable. I mean, again, the third world replenishes itself at 80 million a year, and a lot of those people are unhealthy. There's not much you can really do for them. They can't do things for themselves, let alone us do it for them. 27. We seek to build strong economic foundation for all countries, sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, and essential for prosperity. This will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. In other words, if you make too much, they want to basically not allow you to earn more than. Mind you, this is going to be for select few that will be exception to the rule. It's always the same thing under even all the communist regimes you've ever looked at. The people who run it don't have to follow the rules. Everybody else does, right? We will be working to build a dramatic, sustainable, innovative, and people-centered economies, promoting youth employment and women's economic empowerment in particularly, and decent work for all. We will eradicate forced labor and human trafficking and child labor in all of its forms. But then again, the United Nations is out there buying rafts for the migrants, for example, well documented using like George Soros-funded groups and whatever. Who basically aid human trafficking. So yeah, again, yeah. And as far as growing economies, well, all the economies around the world are taking hits right now. There's not too many stable economies out there. Uh, yeah, I mean, there's parts of the economies that are doing well, same like here in Canada. But if you look at the overall trend, everybody's going into a swan dive of disaster economically. And at a time when they want to bring in a global carbon tax and all that, when people are already strained to the max, all this utopianistic stuff is not going to be able, nobody's going to be able to afford it. So again, this is what happens when you allow the United Nations to make laws for you. And if here in Canada, for example, I was watching CPAC the other day, and again, almost every bill is a link to the United Nations. All the parties are in on the United. They're more concerned about the world stage than they are about their own people. And that's the problem, is if the governments actually took care of their people, not every country is going to be a prosperous country. I get that, and I get what they're trying to say, but the problem is it's not realistic. So the only way their view is that we're just going to take from these people and give to those people. So you're just displacing the problem and creating more problems rather than actually fixing the problem. Some problems just can't be fixed. And that said, and when you get the argument, well, everybody should have the right to do this and do that, well, then give up your seat, you know what I mean, and give it to somebody else. If you want to do that kind of charity, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, there's no way this is sustainable, no matter which way they go with it. You can't have a free everything, free education, free healthcare, free this, free that. It's pay me now, pay me later, and that's what we're dealing with economically, globally. That's going on now. So at some point, yeah, it's just going to collapse. And when it does, how many people die, right? So, and again, I'd rather teach people how to fish than to give them a fish. You know what I mean? And of course, they were saying the stuff I missed. They were saying stuff like they would respect people's countries and laws and rules, but you're going to have to do what we say. And again, the UN always puts it out as it's a recommendation to endorse this. But the thing is if you look at the people that are politicians in the West, for example, most of these people they're idiots. They are complete, utter idiots. Anything you put across these people, they'll try to pass it. If you tell them it's a left-wing agenda or a right-wing agenda, depending on what side of the aisle are on, they'll do it. They'll go for it right away. They don't even question it. That's the problem. And you see it here in Canada. Every MP that you come out with here saying sustainable development is a brain-dead idiot. They're so, and these people are chosen specifically because they don't have the intellect to question whether it's good policy or bad policy. You only have to give them a few buzzwords and they'll hook, line, and sinker. Just tell them sustainable development. Oh, okay, that sounds really wondrous. But then when you dive into how they plan to achieve this, then it's not so good. But these people, they lack critical thinking skills to be able to work out that centralized power is a bad idea. The only way they can convince people is by the brainwashing that they're doing in schools. But I think it all backfires anyway. It's already kind of backfiring globally. People just don't want this stuff. And again, when you say that everybody has to comply with no say, then no, it's definitely not going to work. It's different if everybody is on the same page. And using buzzwords and stuff like that is, again, it's not what they say, it's how are they going to do it. Sorry. Okay, and all the countries stand to benefit from having healthy, well-educated workforce and knowledge and skills needed to be productive and fulfilled with the full participation in society. We will strengthen and productivity and captive at least developing countries in all sectors, including the structural transformation. We will adopt policies in which the productive capacities producing the productive employment, financially inclusive, sustainable. What does financially inclusive mean? You know what I mean? That means bailouts. That's what that's really talking about. When you understand what they're talking about, sustainable agriculture transformation, we adopt policies in which increase productive capacities, productive and productive employment, agriculture, pastoralists and fisheries. Development, sustainable international development, universal access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, modern energy services, sustainable transport systems, and quality and reliance on infrastructure. Okay, so what they're saying is coal, for example. They would get rid of coal in favor of windmills or hydro or whatever. And in itself is not a bad idea, but there's some countries that can't afford that yet. So they can't do it. There's just no possible way for them to put in a modern hydro dam or irrigation system and stuff like that. So that means other nations that have money have to pay for them. And the problem what they're seeing in Africa is all these areas where they're putting in all the infrastructure, the Africans they have no desire to maintain this stuff. You have to bring in foreigners to maintain it, and which is kind of counterproductive. So it means the system is just being paid for by others for people who don't really want it in the first place. And it just goes on and on and on. And again, you get no say about what they're going to take from you. You know what I mean? 28. We commit to fundamental changes in the way our societies produce and consume goods and services. Governments, international organizations, the business sector, and the non-state actors and individuals must contribute to changing unsustainable consumption and productivity patterns, including those through the mobilization from all sources of financial and technological assistance to strengthen developing countries' scientific, technological innovation and capacities to move towards sustainable patterns of consumption and production. We encourage the implementation of a 10-year framework plan of sustainable consumption and production. All countries to take action and with developed countries taking the lead, taking into account that the developing capacities of developing countries. So now here's again what we're saying. So what they're saying is the first world has to take care of the third world. They don't get a choice in this, and until they can get on their feet. Problem is the idea that why they're saying that they don't. With the sustainable development thing, they don't want mass consumption, is what they're saying. They want sustainability. So then, why would you try to modernize societies that are very sustainable to begin with? Yes, they're low on the rung, but I mean, people who live in like little villages and huts and stuff like that. If you industrialize them, then you're putting in plumbing, you're putting in infrastructure, you're putting in metal. You're putting in all the stuff that leads to basically more consumption. So what they're saying is they don't want more consumption, but we're going to set up a society in every nation, like a first world society, which consumes a lot. Makes absolutely no sense. The other thing you have to look at is that, again, who made it mandatory and for the first world to have to take care of the third world? I have nothing against charities and stuff like that, but when it gets to the point where you have no say, and it's like, okay, well, what could be going towards your own country and your own people is going to be put in backbench for third worlders. Again, nothing against the third worlders. Yes, if there's a way they want to cooperate and help them to modernize themselves and industrialize themselves, that's one thing. That's one thing. Develop a private enterprise developing is yes, okay, and you can use good regulations and stuff like that. Fine, nobody has a problem with that. But where the problem comes in is, again, the first world. When they have all the problems, the first world is turning into a second world, third world kind of nations. You could see this all over Europe, Greece, Spain, Italy. They're broke, and because they're of the centralized power in the EU, they can't devalue their currency. They don't have control over it. It's the same with all these other countries. They won't have control over what the development is. Maybe these countries don't want to develop everything. And resources and stuff like that. But if they don't want to prosper from developing resources, that's their call. If they want to prosper from developing resources, that's their call too. So maybe helping them in the sense of, okay, well, model it after us. I mean, that's the thing about the third world. They don't have to create anything. They just have to duplicate. They just have to duplicate the first world. That's it. But it's not a matter of the ability to do it. It's the will to do it. The people don't want it. They want to stay in their superstitions. They want to stay in the tribes. And trying to force them to do that creates so much destabilization and war. Again, why are we there in the first place? Did anybody ask me? No. Did anybody ask you? No. But the utopianistic bureaucrats at the UN say, no, we're going to make you do this whether you want to or not, regardless of what the outcome is. It is ridiculous what this one world government stuff. 29. We recognize the positive contribution of migrants for inclusive growth and sustainable development. That includes your migrant crisis right there. Because their idea is the more people they're populist-minded, some of these people. It's kind of strange how some of these eugenics-based people think. Some of them think the more people you have, the better you're going to perform on the world stage. That numbers are everything. They don't take into account quality of life. So meaning, the more people you have in a country, the better your country should be on the world stage. So in short, India and China should be the best countries in the world to live in, but they're clearly not. Nothing against those people, but it's true. The poverty that's in some of those countries is astronomical. Because they're overpopulated to a degree. The other thing, what they're saying here is that, well, because we believe this, we could just take all these migrants from North Africa and throw them into Europe, and they'll just integrate into Europe. But that's not happening now, is it? They're ripping Europe apart. Even if it's not all of them, the ones that are pretty dangerous. But anyway, yeah, that's how these people think. And if you look at all, like Angela Merkel and all those types, that's exactly the plan they're following, sustainable development. But then again, Europe is kind of crunched for resources and stuff like that. And what do you got? Flooding in more people when you can't even take care of the people you already got? That's not sustainable. Again, what they say and what they do is two different things. But anyway, we also recognize that the international migration is a multi-dimensional reality for major relevance of the development of countries of origin, transit, and destination, which requires coherent and comprehensive response. We will cooperate internationally to ensure safe, orderly, regular migration involving full respect of human rights and humane treatment of migrants regardless of migration status, or refugees or displaced persons. Such cooperation should also strengthen the resilience of committees hosting refugees, in particular in developing countries. We underline the right of a migrant to return to their country of citizenship and recall the state that measure that returns to national are duly received. Okay, so what they're saying is, sorry, a little bit parched here. Just swallowed a fly. What they're saying here is that migrants and immigrants have basically every right to be in your country as you do. That's basically what they're saying. Again, the United Nations hates the nation state. They don't like sovereignty. That's why the EU, the United Nations, they do. It's the same people running everything at the very top of it. It's only a handful of people that make all these decisions, right? The banking system is the United Nations. The United Nations is the EU. The EU is the banking system, the education system, the one world, NATO. This is all one system. It's a one world government. That's what they want. They just say it's separate, but it's not separate because they all work hand in hand. So with that said, I mean, this is the problem with the UN overreach. We have tons of UN overreach here in Canada. But anyway, number 30, we are strongly urged to refrain from promulgating and applying an unrealistic economical, financial, or trade measures not in accordance with international law and the Charter of the United Nations, that impedes the full achievement of economical, social development, and particularly in developing countries. Again, I love all these do-gooders that say they're going to help all the developing countries, but what they won't tell you is how they're going to pay for it. Again, all these third worlders, nothing against them personally. Yes, it'd be nice if they could get their act together. It's okay to help them, but there's no economic plan that shows that you can actually help every single person on the planet. It's just not feasible. And the fact that they get to make the decisions of what's feasible and what's not is definitely not in the best interest of most countries. Again, we'll take from here to give to there, but at the end of the day, like communism always does, it just makes everybody equally poor, and it is a form of communism. Once the government, these unelected bureaucrats make decisions for your country, and you have no say to override them, you're pretty much under a communistic regime, regardless of what they're trying to do, whether it's good or bad. When you lose your say, right? We acknowledge that the UNFCCC is primarily intergovernmental forum that negotiates the global response to climate change. Again, the scam that it is. In other words, more taxes. We are determined to address sensibly the threat of posed climate change and environmental denigration. The global nature of climate change calls for the widest possible international cooperation aimed at accelerating and reducing global greenhouse gas emissions and addressing adaptation to the adverse impacts of climate change. We note that the grave concern of significant gap between the effective parties mitigation pledges to in the terms of global annual emissions of greenhouse gases by 2020. Aggregated emissions pathways consist of likely having hold an increased global advantage of below 2 or 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Okay, here's the problem I have. Okay, and some people, okay, if the global temperatures go up by 2 degrees or go down by 2 degrees, everybody's saying it's complete catastrophic failure if we warm by 2 degrees. Okay, well, I don't think so. You're telling me longer growing seasons are going to be a bad thing if we were talking about warming. But here what they're saying is they don't know if it's going to warm or if it's going to cool. You know what I mean? Like, so it's either going to go up by 2 degrees or it's going to go down by 1.5 degrees or vice versa, whatever they just said. And they're also the greenhouse gas thing. Yes, it's a good idea to make more fuel efficient engines and lower emissions. I have no problem doing that. The problem is when they blame man-made global warming on CO2. The problem is if you add up all the countries together, it doesn't mean that we can't improve environmental laws so that we're not polluting as much. But if you add up all the polluters in the world, it doesn't even account for 1% of the world's CO2, and the world's CO2 level is like not even a thousandth of the lethal dose right now. So when you look at it for what it is, the climate change thing I think has been pretty debunked with some, enough people. If you look into it as non-biasedly as possible, because I looked into it as non-biasedly as I could, and it is just a scam. Because what are they proposing? Well, they're proposing basically carbon tax. That's it. That's how they're going to fix the planet, is by taxing you more. Oh, well, yeah, but what they're going to do with this money? Yeah, they never do what they say they're going to do. It's a tax for the sake of. It's Karl Marx's tax people off out of their property. That's basically what these big gigantic governments do. 32. Looking ahead to the COP21 conference in Paris in December, we underscore the commitment to all states to work for the ambition of universal climate agreement. We refer that the protocols and legal instruments or agreed upon outcome with agreed outcome for legal force under the convention applicable of all parties shall addressed in balanced manner in AIA multiplication, adaptation, financing, technology development and transfer, and capacity building, and transparency of action and support. Okay. So it sounds like a lot of regulations coming down the pipe. 33. We recognize that social economical development depends on sustainable management of our planet's natural resources. We are therefore determined to conserve and sustainably use oceans and seas, freshwater resources, as well as forests, mountains, and dry lands, protect biodiversity, ecosystems, wildlife. We are also determined to promote sustainable tourism, tackle water scarcity and water pollution, to strengthen the cooperative and desertification, dust storms, and denigration of drought, and promoting reliance and disaster risk in this regards. We look forward to COP13 of the Convention of Biological Diversity and held in Mexico in 2016. Okay, here's one problem I have. Okay, I don't mind, again, having regulations to protect the oceans and stuff like that. But again, how are they going to fund all this stuff? They can't, and even if they're, the timelines they set are completely, even if you said this was going to be a 100-year or 150-year plan, it's completely unbelievable. It just, you're talking about things that you can't control to begin with. But yeah, sure, again, regulating better standards for shipping and stuff like that, by all means, sure. But when, again, centralized power always seems to backfire on this. And again, what is it? Their only thing is to just regulate everything away. That's the whole thing. 34. We recognize that sustainable urban development and management are critical to the equality of our life of our people. We will work with local authorities, communities, and renew plans of our cities, human settlements, as to foster community cohesion, personnel security, and stimulate innovation and employment. We will reduce the negative impacts of urban activities and chemicals which are hazardous for human health and the environment, including those of environmentally sound management, safe use of chemicals, reduction and recycling and waste, and more efficient of use of water and energy, and will work to minimize the impact of cities and global climate change. We will also take into account population trends and projection in the Journal of Rural Urban Areas and Strategies and Policies. We look forward to upcoming United Nations Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development in Quito, Ecuador. Yeah, so again, all this sustainable development stuff is really, really a scam. Uh, it just because it's so unbelievable what they're trying to do and how they want to do it. So everything sounds nice, but when you understand what laws they're going to put in, for example, one of the things there, I'm not saying it came from the United Nations, but this is the kind of utopianistic thinking some of these people have. But at the end of the day, it's really about getting people, controlling people. You know, you see the small living movement, which is a great thing, sure, but it's really the idea is to charge you more for smaller spaces. The other thing is to regulate farmers off their land so people move into the cities, so you herd everybody up into the cities, all that type of thing. And it really is anti-human, because at some point, these places are not, again, go above their capacities as well, and where do you put all the people? So at that point they have to find ways to soft kill the people. And you see this through socialized healthcare, to the point where, again, it's free, but you might die waiting for treatment because it's not really free. It's pay me now, pay me later, and it's not a completely manageable system. And there's no options outside it. And that's where, like, again, you could look at Sweden, how bad they're doing right now in a lot of ways. You don't feel all the effects on the same day, but at 10 years down the road, I mean, you're gonna, like, they have housing problems in Sweden, yet they're bringing in more, an insane amount of migrants in there. Why would you bring in anybody when you can't even house your own citizens? You know what I mean? That type of thing. And it goes on and on and on. So housing, all these housing projects that they want to build for, low income people and stuff like that. Well, again, why are you flooding in more people? Rather than do that, how about you get great, the best social program you can have is jobs, and some of these green jobs are not sustainable either. Again, it can only exist with public money. And that's your first problem. Almost everything they propose so far requires public money. So, I mean, you're tapping out the public. They just can't afford this. And we're seeing it, country to country. Everybody's saying, "Oh well, we need higher minimum wage." Another example would be the $20,000 a year guaranteed income here in Canada. You had some lefties talking about it. It's been quiet now. Nobody's talking about it anymore. I think most people came to the realization, okay, yeah, that's great, but who's going to pay for that? And a great way to kill productivity too. Why? Well, somebody making $17,000 a year isn't going to get up and go to work if they can sit at home for 20. You know what I mean? Or you know what I mean? So now you've just increased welfare recipients beyond belief. And again, who's going to pay for it? This system will collapse on itself. Switzerland, I think, just had a referendum. I think they were going to pay people like 2,800, whatever I guess francs or whatever it is they have there. I don't quote me on the price, but it was something that they wanted to pay people 2,800 of their currency dollars every month. That was completely unsustainable. So obviously the people there had the referendum on it, and it was a no-go. So I think that was a very wise choice because that wouldn't last too long, and that would implode your country. Extreme socialism is a failed model. It always is, and that's exactly what this is. 35. Sustainable development cannot be realized without peace and security. The peace and security will be at risk without sustainable development. The new agenda recognizes that the need to build peace, just as inclusive societies, and provide equal access to justice, and that are based respect from human rights, including the right to development, on effective rule of law and good governance at all levels of transportation. Transparent and effective and accountable situations, factors which give rise to violence, insecurity, and injustice, such as inequality, corruption, poor governance, inflict financial and arms flow, and addressing in the agenda. So we're talking about the Small Arms Trade Treaty deal now. Must be redoubled or efforts or resolved to prevent conflict, to support the post-conflict countries, including through the ensure that women have a role in peace building and state building. We call for further effectiveness and measures in action and to be taken in conformity and international law to remove the obstacles to the full realization of right to self-determination of the people and colonial foreign occupation. Okay, yeah. Which countries adversely affect economic and social development as well as their development. So what you're saying is that Israel and the United States funding ISIS to overthrow Bashar al-Assad was a bad idea? Okay, I agree with that. But are they going to stop doing it? No, because again, they have these crazy ideas. And yes, it is one system. The UN, like the way they're reporting on the Syrian crisis in itself, okay, they send in food to Syria for the people. However, time and time again, it gets captured by the ISIS guys. Why? Because they send it in the known areas where the ISIS guys are. So in other words, the United Nations and the World Food Organization, I guess, is directly feeding the ISIS guys. Because there's no reason why they can't airdrop the stuff in the safe areas. But notice they're getting the food where the ISIS guys are and not where the Syrian people that are against ISIS are. Russia's able to do this. You know what I mean? It's funny how they can drop food to the people who need it. And I'm not a big, huge Russia fan either, but you can see it for what it is. But yeah, it's things like that. So they say one thing, and then again, even the United Nations came out and said, no, it wasn't Bashar al-Assad's troops using chemical weapons against his people. But they keep trying. They can't find evidence of it, but they keep throwing the claim out there. So again, you can't trust the United Nations either, because again, NATO and the United Nations work hand in hand with the Rothschild IMF banking system, with the one world media, the one world government stuff. It's all one system, right? And you see what happens to the countries that don't go along. They go to war with you. 36. We pledge to foster intercultural understanding, tolerance, mutual respect, and ethnic of global citizenship. There you go. That's your migrant crisis right there. And sharing responsibility. We acknowledge that the natural and cultural diversity of the world and recognize that the cultures and civilizations can contribute to the crucial elder and sustainable development. Okay, here's a problem right there. These global citizens, these one, like no borders anywhere, everything will just be fine, but it's not. And to say that anybody coming from any other country is going to contribute equally in your country, again, there's many people in the third world have a very low IQ, and where you have low IQs, you have more of a jungle-like mentality. You tend to have, a lot more chaos, a lot more war, a lot more bad things happen. The poverty's there. So you can say, okay, yeah, well, that's the whole point why we want to educate everybody. Okay, well, you educate them there, but what you're saying is just flood them anywhere and they'll just learn. That's not the case. It really isn't, because we could see it again in utopianistic thinking that everybody's going to want to be the same as you is not realistic at all. And some of these countries, third world countries, have really ass backward ideas of how to have a society. Which, if it works for them over there, that's fine, but keep it over there. There's nothing xenophobic about that. It's just being practical. Meanwhile, these people think that again, the idea of a nation state is a complete obscenity to them. But yet they rule the roost from their an area that doesn't have to deal with these other people. It's just they're do-gooders. They think they're doing really good, but when they're actually creating more disaster. Again, how many people die because of these bad decisions, right? Migrant crisis is a perfect example. The amount of people dying because governments promise free stuff for migrants, yet they die drowning trying to get there. So in other words, those deaths are not really just on the human smugglers, but they're on these so-called do-gooders that promise all these people this stuff that they can't deliver anyway. And when the migrants get to where they're going, they find out, hey, wait a minute, they promised me all this free stuff and they're not giving me it because they can't afford it, But they said they could, 37. Support is also important to enable the sustainable development. We recognize that the growing and contributing of sport to the realization of development and peace, it's promoting tolerance and respect and contributions. It makes empowerment of women and young people, individuals and communities, as well as health and education and social inclusion objectives. Again, not believable. It's this idea that, and they're only, that's why the EU put out the hate speech law that you can't criticize the migrants and stuff like that now over there. They're really cracking down on that stuff because the plan is failing, and their method is this: if we just tolerance is basically bring in these migrants, let them do what they want. You need cultural understanding because they're coming from a rough place. That's why they're allowed to get away with what they're allowed to get away with. Raping women, attacking women, and yet they're on the other hand they're saying we need women to be safe. But then you're doing the most opening borders, making things the most unsafe you can. But anyway. We reaffirm, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, that needs to respect territorial integrity and the political independence of the states, means and implementation. 39. I'll probably end up on this one because it is a pretty long, it's pretty dry material, but it's pretty long. But it gives you the idea of how utopianistic thinking these people are. Like they think they can basically run the world. That's exactly what their one world government. That's exactly what the United Nations has been talking about for years. It's just not doable. Anyway, 39. The scale of ambition of the new agenda requires the revitalization of global partnership to ensure the implementation. We fully commit to this. The partnership will work in spirit with global solidarity, and particularly solidarity with the poorest and with people in the vulnerable situations. It will facilitate intensive global engagement in support and implementation of the goals and targets, bring together governments, the private sector, civilized society, and United Nations systems and other actors, and mobilizing all available resources. So in other words, the only way they can get this done is by taking all the resources, claiming the resources, which you can see how global government has been doing that, taking the people's say away and just going ahead and doing what they want to do, never mind what you want to do, or have any say of it. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up like that. So this is the second one. I'll try to get the third one out as quickly as possible. I'll probably release these back to back anyway, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, that type of thing. It is what it is. There's a little bit more to cover, and just so you understand what Agenda 2030, what areas of they're going for complete domination of the planet. Problem is it's just not sustainable. Their sustainable development plan is not sustainable because it's just the idea of centralized power and forcing everybody to do things their way is just not going to work. Communism always fails no matter what version it takes. The problem is, again, how many people die in the process. So other things, you can see that they're talking about the over. And again, I missed it because I forgot to hit the record button. I did an hour and of. The Agenda 2030, and the parts that I missed were basically it explains why you have transgendered bathrooms now and all that stuff. And I do look at that stuff. The third wave feminism. It is a part of it. It explains why it's so crazy, why they're sexualizing children from the ages grades 1 to 7 and older. That's why they're doing all this. This is a part of their utopianistic plan. These are all United Nations plans, and that's why they're all kind of coming out at the same time. So it's not about equality. They don't ask the people. They just do it. And you see how these lawmakers everywhere are just going ahead and doing this. Like they don't even put it to referendum. And to have real prosperity in your society, the people have to have a say. So we're talking about a handful of people at the United Nations that want to run the world. And even if some of the stuff sounds good, and some of it is, like some of the ideas are probably not that bad, but it's how they go about it. And the only way they can go about it is by controlling everything. And if they control everything, you get no say. And you'd say, well, yeah, but it's for the greater good. Again, the roads to hell are all paved with greater good, right? So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. So I'll get into part 3, and hopefully that'll finish it up. So maybe there might be a part 4. We'll see. But anyway, if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Links down below. Thank you so much to everybody who has. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. If you want to make a couple of bucks for yourself, you can check out my TSU link down below. It's a lot of fun. It works like Facebook. Takes your mind off all the serious, crazy stuff. And it also, it's free and doesn't cost you anything to join. So you might as well do that. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourselves. Be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day, eh? G'day, hi, and welcome. All right, this is part 3. Sorry, part 2. Part 2. I kind of screwed up the other day, and I deleted a whole bunch of stuff after realizing that I didn't have the microphone on. So I skipped a little bit of the Agenda 2030 from basically 14 to 26 of their mandate, so to speak. So you can go look it up, but it's more to give you an idea of what they're talking about and how they want to implement stuff. So let's just jump into this. So hopefully I won't make that same goof again. Make sure that the mic is on. There we go. And yeah, so it goes like this. 26, to promote physical and mental health and well-being and extended life expectancy for all, we must achieve universal healthcare coverage and access to quality health care. No one must be left behind. We commit to accelerating the progress made to the date in reduction in newborn children and maternally by the end of such preventable deaths by 2030. We are committed to ensuring universal access to sexual and reproductive health care services, in other words, abortions, including for the family planning, abortions, information, education. We will equally accelerate the pace of progress made in fighting malaria and tuberculosis and hepatitis, Ebola, and other communicable diseases and epidemics, including the addressing growing antimicrobial resistance and the problem unattended diseases and infection of developing countries. We are committed to preventing the treatment of non-communicable diseases, including behavioral, developmental, and neurological disorders, which constitutes a major challenge for sustainable development. Well, first off, how are they going to give world health care systems? Well, one thing they're doing right now, this is one of the other thing about the migrant crisis and stuff like that, mass refugees going all over the world and mass immigration, is that it makes it a world healthcare system. So it doesn't matter who pays into it, everybody gets a kick at the can. Problem is it dilutes and strains the healthcare systems around the world so much that less people and less get help. So yes, you get free treatment, but you might die waiting for treatment. And you're seeing this more and more even in first world countries. So again, how do they very utopianistically, how do they pay for this plan? They can't. It's impossible. So the only thing they can do is force others to give up what they have for others. So basically the United Nations decides who's needy and who's not. That's kind of a scary thing when you think about it. Again, this is how it ends up genocidal, is whether it's by purpose or not, what you end up with is a healthcare system that is just not sustainable. I mean, again, the third world replenishes itself at 80 million a year, and a lot of those people are unhealthy. there's not much you can really do for them. They can't do things for themselves, let alone us do it for them. 27. We seek to build strong economic foundation for all countries, sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, and essential for prosperity. This will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. In other words, if you make too much, they want to basically not allow you to earn more than. Mind you, this is going to be for select few that will be accepted to the rule. It's always the same thing under even all the communist regimes you've ever looked at. The people who run it don't have to follow the rules. Everybody else does, right? We will be working to build a dramatic, sustainable, innovative, and people-centered economies, promoting youth employment and women's economic empowerment in particularly, and decent work for all. We will eradicate forced labor and human trafficking and child labor in all of its forms. But then again, the United Nations is out there buying rafts for the migrants, for example, well documented using like George Soros-funded groups and whatever. Who basically aid human trafficking. So yeah, again, yeah. And as far as growing economies, well, all the economies around the world are taking hits right now. There's not too many stable economies out there. Yeah, I mean, there's parts of the economies that are doing well, same like here in Canada. But if you look at the overall trend, everybody's going into a swan dive of disaster economically. And at a time when they want to bring in a global carbon tax and all that, when people are already strained to the max, all this utopianistic stuff is not going to be able, nobody's going to be able to afford it. So again, this is what happens when you allow the United Nations to make laws for you. And if here in Canada, for example, I was watching CPAC the other day, and again, almost every bill is a link to the United Nations. All the parties are in on the United. They're more concerned about the world stage than they are about their own people. And that's the problem, is if the governments actually took care of their people, not every country is going to be a prosperous country. I get that. And I get what they're trying to say, but the problem is it's not realistic. So the only way their view is that we're just going to take from these people and give to those people. So you're just displacing the problem and creating more problems rather than actually fixing the problem. Some problems just can't be fixed. And that said, and when you get the argument, well, everybody should have the right to do this and do that, well, then give up your seat, you know what I mean, and give it to somebody else. If you want to do that kind of charity, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, it's